Right now on Matter of Fact.
What is the strategy from the Democrats' perspective right now?
Will thousands of unreleased documents derail President Trump's Supreme Court pick?
Once we know a lot more about him, there's going to be concern.
Plus, a small Texas town struggles to recover nearly a year after Hurricane Harvey.
When you talk about politics overshadowing somebody's devastation, it's a sad thing.
Why the mayor says his city's been left behind. And meet the woman changing the narrative around one of America's darkest times.
When I first got here, that was, I think, one of the headlines. African-American woman takes over Civil War Museum. I said, okay, here we go. Here we go.
I'm Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact. The Senate is back in session. Members have lots of unfinished business before the midterms. The top priority for Republicans, getting Brett Kavanaugh confirmed as the next U.S. Supreme Court justice. Republicans want him sworn in by October 1st, when the high court begins its new term. Democrats say they're being forced to make a rush to judgment. At least 49 of 51 Republican senators have said they will vote to confirm Kavanaugh. Senator Ben Cardin is a Democrat from the state of Maryland. It's nice to have you with us today,
Thank you.
sir. So Kavanaugh could be confirmed without any Democratic support at all. You have 51 Republican senators, let's say 50, depending on how Senator McCain is able to participate or not. So you'd have to flip one Republican, maybe two. You have 3 Democrats who are in red states, who are up for re-election, who have signaled that they'd support Kavanaugh. So you might have to flip 4 people in order to block Kavanaugh being appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. What is the strategy from the Democrats' perspective right now?
I think first our strategy is to find out more information about Judge Kavanaugh. It's somewhat shocking, and the American people should really be concerned that the Republican leadership are shielding Judge Kavanaugh from producing records while he was in the White House, records that are critically important for us to understand his position on national security issues, his position on privacy, his positions on internal investigations, those type of matters that are important for us to know and the American people to know. So I think our first strategy is that we want complete transparency. We then think that once we know a lot more about him, that there's going to be concern, not just by the Republicans, but by the American people. And we hope that will translate into a number of senators saying, look, let's not rush this. Let's make sure we get all the information out and let every senator vote the way he or she thinks is right.
How much of the documents that have been requested have you actually gotten?
Well, first, the number of documents that were requested by the Republican leadership, this was not a joint request, was 15% of what we think is necessary for us to properly evaluate this nominee. So 85% of the documents were not even requested by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Of that 15%, about 1/3 of that material has been made available to date. So there's still a lot of material that has not yet even been returned, that's been requested. And now a hearing is set for September 4th. So we don't even have a chance to review it before the hearings take place. That's just wrong.
So what can Democrats do? All of that being said, what do you do?
I think one of the most important functions of the United States Senate, of the United States Congress, is to act as an independent branch of government and to act as a check and balance on the president, whether the president is of our party or of a different party. And I was proud of the fact that the United States Senate led legislation I helped draft that changed the course in regards to the president's negotiations with Russia. We passed a major bill that took away some of the power of the president in foreign policy. So we have acted. I am disappointed that we're not more aggressive as an institution in we should have passed legislation to protect Mr. Mueller and his investigation. We haven't done that. So I am disappointed as an institution. We have not taken up legislation as we should to check and balance on the president of the United States.
There are lots of judicial appointments that have been made. The Senate's installed, I think it's 24 appellate judges under President Trump. So within 2 years, that's more than any other president. I would guess if you and I went out into the street here in Washington, D.C. and polled random people walking by, they would shrug their shoulders and not care that appellate judges are being appointed at a rapid pace. Why should they care?
The appellate courts are extremely important. Most of the decisions are going to end at the appellate court. They're not going to reach the Supreme Court of the United States. So a lot of important policy is being determined by the Court of Appeals. We think it's outrageous that the type of people that he is nominating with very little qualifications that are coming to him through outside groups that have an agenda rather than trying to appoint mainstream jurists that will understand the importance of the checks and balances in the judicial branch of government.
Senator Ben Cardin, it's nice to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it.
Next on Matter of Fact, the check is in the mail.
10 years ago that we were still getting funding and recovery dollars from that storm.
1 year after Hurricane Harvey slammed Port Arthur, Texas, the city just received aid for another storm, Hurricane Ike. Plus, can she put the Confederacy in context?
This idea that everyone in the South were ardent Confederates is absolutely foolishness.
She's one of the only African American women reshaping the story of the Civil War.
This week marks the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. The storm left about 100 people dead and caused more than $125 billion in damages. It's tied with Hurricane Katrina as the costliest storm on record. When you mention Hurricane Harvey, most people think about damage to Houston, but up and down the Gulf Coast, the hurricane hit with deadly and devastating force, including hitting the city of Port Arthur, which is still struggling to recover. Port Arthur has 55,000 residents, lies 90 miles east of Houston. And when Harvey hit, it dumped more than 60 inches of rain on the city, breaking a U.S. record and damaging 80% of the city's housing. At the time, the mayor wrote on Facebook, "Our whole city is underwater right now." Mayor Derek Freeman joins us from Port Arthur, Texas today. It's so nice to see you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for being with us. Tell me a little bit about Port Arthur. I gave people kind of the broad strokes, but tell us about your city of 55,000 people.
Well, we're a hard-working, blue-collar, resilient town on the water here in Texas. You know, we're oil and gas. We produce about 40% of the jet fuel across America. The great thing about Port Arthur is we have great Texas barbecue and Cajun food. This is where they meet, right here on the Texas-Louisiana border. So it's a great place to be.
I love a mayor who does the pitch for the city and the food, so for visitors to come, the tourist pitch from the mayor. Seriously, a year ago, you were facing absolute devastation, 60 inches. Landing in 4 days, record-breaking in the bad way.
Yes, it was. You know, it was devastating. We've been dealing with the one-year anniversaries coming up here in a few days, and we're still, you know, just crawling to come back to where we were before the storm hit.
Talk to me specifically about the damage that you're looking at. What has been done in that past year and what still needs to be done in your city that hasn't been done in the past year?
Well, the first thing that we're trying to do now, the biggest thing is housing. We have people that are displaced all across the nation. We're trying to get those folks back home. We lost all of our fleet. We lost garbage trucks. We lost all of our commercial trucks, grapples, everything in the city of Port Arthur. We lost all of our equipment. So not only did we try to get our city back online, but we didn't have any equipment to do so. So we've been struggling to get back, not only to restore services, but to get people back in their homes.
Has it been frustrating with most of the media's attention, frankly, when there is media attention, kind of lands on Houston and not on cities around Houston?
Yes, ma'am. You know, we were hit, just like you said, about 85% of the structures here in Port Arthur were some way damaged by the storm. And, you know, if the other 15% weren't damaged, then you took on some of your family, your friends, and your neighbors. So I say all the time, 100% of our citizens in Port Arthur some way, somehow was affected by this storm.
You just got a payment from Hurricane Ike. Is that correct?
Yes.
The city just got a couple $1 million. I mean, Hurricane Ike, for those who don't remember, that was 10 years ago.
You know, we've been through storms before, so the expectations, we know how slow things can go. You know, I wasn't here in past storms before, but they say the response for this storm is better than previous. And I'd hate to see what the responses were in previous storms because this has been very, very slow.
That's terrible. You are not just the mayor of the city. Your family was also affected by the hurricane. Tell me a little bit about what you personally have been dealing with in terms of your home and kind of getting your business back.
Yeah, well, you know, like you said, I had 5 children, my wife and I. We were living in about a 4,000 square foot home that got flooded, and so now we're down to 900 square feet with 1 restroom. It's nothing about my story. My story is duplicated all across the city.
You know, TV this past week, I was just thinking about this morning, has focused a lot on President Trump, probably 99.99% of the coverage, or Omarosa Manigault has a book out. Do you ever watch sort of all the reporting and just feel like, where are the people who are telling the stories of the people who are trying to recover from the storm? I mean, it just feels to me, and not just Port Arthur, frankly, every single hurricane that took place over the last year, it just kind of blown out of the water by other more, I think, frivolous stuff sometimes.
Yeah, you know, it's an unfortunate thing. You know, when you talk about politics overshadowing somebody's devastation, it's a sad thing. But again, that's why we're so thankful for you sending a crew down to tell Port Arthur's story, because we have people hurting, and we're willing to speak up. We'll raise our hand high as possible that's needed to make sure we get the attention and get it back home to Port Arthur where it's needed.
Well, we certainly wish you the best of luck, both on being able to get some funding and some help and some support for rebuilding that infrastructure, but also to have a really, really, really boring hurricane season this year. Like, really boring. Derek Freeman is the mayor of the city of Port Arthur. Yep, I'm with you on that. Thank you, Mayor Freeman. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
When we come back, who really controls the government? You or the politicians you elected?
26 states allow voters to bypass their legislature and create their own laws.
How's that working out? Plus,
And this is the Robert E. Lee. Frankly, it's an extraordinary piece of art.
Confederate monuments have a surprising ally.
No other city is more deeply entwined with the Civil War than Richmond, Virginia. Once the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond has more Confederate monuments than any other city. It's home to Monument Avenue, a shrine built for the rebels of the South. Well, now the city is trying to reconcile its past. The mayor wants the monuments removed, and he created a commission to help advise him on the future of the statues. And among their newly released recommendations, the statue of Confederate President Jefferson Davis must come down. One reason? He's not from Virginia. The remaining statues, they said, should include historical data to put them in context. One of the co-chairs of the commission is Christy Coleman, an African-American woman who is also the CEO of the Civil War Museum in Richmond.
History's always been a part of my world. My parents exposed us to it. We used to spend weekends at the Smithsonian when we lived in Washington. And then, of course, you know, we moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, and history was all around us. One summer, I auditioned for a street actor job at the historic area, and that started this journey. Realistically, number one, there aren't very many women that do Civil War, and there certainly weren't women of color. You know, it's been 10 years since I've been at the helm, but when I first got here, that was, I think, one of the headlines. African-American woman takes over Civil War Museum. I said, okay, here we go. Here we go. We wanted to elicit a response. We wanted people to see something that would strike them to their core, whether that is anger, whether that is confusion or chaos or rage. We wanted that in there. This war is not as simple as people would like to make it. And that's the part for me that I've grown to appreciate in ways I did not when I first came through the doors. One of the narratives at its core is this idea that somehow freedom was given versus earned. The North went to war to free the slaves. No mentioning or reality of the generations of African Americans that are freedom seekers themselves. No mention of the fact that 180,000 plus African American men, many of whom were formerly enslaved, take up arms themselves. The other one that we have to deal with is this idea of noble cause. And we have to remember there was a draft for both sides of the war at one point. And so this idea that everyone in the South were ardent Confederates is absolutely foolishness. We want our visitors to really understand that the Civil War, number one, wasn't inevitable, and there were no real turning points. It was 4 years of absolute chaos.
Don't let them keep destroying my children's Southern history.
If these statues are heritage, then your heritage is hate.
I don't think that people are willing to hear each other. They're so entrenched in their positioning that they're not willing to hear that there may be something that's a little different. And that's what we strive to do.
I think what's happening is healthy for this community because the community is grappling with what it wants to value moving through the 21st century. Okay, so here is the Jeff Davis Monument. Frankly, when I look at the statues, they don't have the same power for me. I understand them and the environment in which these things were built, but for people who have a truly visceral, emotional reaction to all of this, you can't discount that either.
If we can't understand this American crisis and trauma and how it all came together, we cannot be what we were intended to be. That's why it's important. That's why I still do what I do.
Despite the recommendations from the commission, current state law does not allow cities to remove war memorials. After the rally in Charlottesville, the state's General Assembly rejected bills that would have given cities control over the fate of their Confederate statues.
Coming up next, when it comes to ballot initiatives, does your vote really count?
Lawmakers around the country are getting fed up with voters writing their own laws.
And who needs horsepower when you've got the sun?
Now to a weekly feature we like to call We're Paying Attention, even if you're too busy. It looks like lawmakers around the country are getting fed up with voters writing their own laws. In June, voters in Washington, D.C. approved a ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage for restaurant workers to $15 an hour. It passed by a 12-point margin. Now, the city council wants to overturn that law, saying it's bad policy. And since only 17% of residents voted, it's not really the will of the people. It's not that unusual. In the past 2 years, state lawmakers have filed more than 100 bills aimed at reversing voter-approved laws. For example, last November, 59% of Maine voters approved expanding Medicaid. It was later vetoed by the Republican governor. It's a problem that won't go away. 26 states allow voters to bypass their legislature and create their own laws, either through initiatives or referenda. In 2016, 76 citizen ballot measures appeared nationwide, the highest in just about a decade. This fall, voters in 20 states plus D.C. will have the chance to weigh in on nearly 50 ballot initiatives.
When we return, the electric car that charges as you drive.
Giving new meaning to the term sunroof. Have you been thinking about buying an electric car but are worried about finding a place to charge it? A new German startup says they've got the answer. Meet the Zion. The only power it needs is from the sun. The car has 330 solar cells on the hood, the side doors, and the roof, which charge the battery while you're driving. But it's not just the solar panels that are unique. It also has moss on the dashboard. That's for air filtration and humidity regulation. Talk about going green. The Zion will be available next year at a cost of about $25,000. And already, the company has nearly 7,000 reservations. The manufacturer, Sono, isn't the only car company rushing a solar-powered car to market. A Dutch company also has one. It's called the Lightyear, but it has a higher price tag of about $140,000. One reason Europe is moving quickly on developing more electric cars, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, and France have all agreed to a complete ban on fossil fuel cars by 2040, making the internal combustion engine a thing of the past, at least there, and giving new meaning to the term sunroof. That's it for Matter of Fact. We'll see you back here next week.